Committee.
It's not that super.
Oh.
Hey, give you a minute. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Okay. You tell me if I'm not talking loud enough. We have a bullhorn, but that's kind of an oxymoron here. So, okay, thank you for being here. First of all, to the folks at Occupy Wall Street and Occupy DC, thank you. Your voices are being heard. We're now talking in this country about inequality. We're talking about the importance of helping the 99%, not the 1%, and you're the reason. And it's great. And many of us who've walked with you past the White House a few days ago, to the Treasury, we really value what you do. It's important to send that message. So I'm going to spend about 5 minutes summarizing why you should be worried about the Super Committee and why you should be glad that they're marching from New York, from Occupy Wall Street, through the other occupied groups to be here by the 23rd of November, to be here to tell the Super Committee, don't cut their benefits, don't give tax cuts to the very well off, and a lot more. So that there's a group of occupiers who are walking from New York City, step by step, picking up people along the way, stopping at different Occupy. I think they were in Trenton yesterday, other places. And along the way, they're delivering the message of the occupiers, and they're targeting at this thing called the Super Committee. We have some flyers here which you can read a bit about them. Just the key thing to remember, it's not so super. It's quite the opposite. It's a committee that's really targeted ultimately, or this whole process of cutting human services, cutting social services, cutting your children's Social Security, your Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of this is pulling from the 99%. It's a group that's walking up here to say, let's let the Bush tax cuts, which have given most of the money to the very, very well off, not only the top 1%, but the top 0.01% have benefited the most. It's saying enough. What we need in Washington is a financial speculation tax on Wall Street. A lot of countries are talking about it. We need to talk about it. What we need in Washington is a millionaire's tax, not a super committee. What we need in Washington is an expiration of the Bush tax cuts. So that's what they're about. Now, what is the Super Committee? How many of you remember, and I'm going to just go 5 minutes because I'm really going to ask you to talk. My name is Kingston, by the way. I teach at Syracuse University. This is one of the most fun classes I've ever had the opportunity to teach. I love it. And I'm also co-chair of the Strengthen Social Security campaign that a number of people here have been involved with. And the message there is hands off Social Security. The bigger message, and the message we'll leave, is no cuts, stop jobs, no cuts, and make those who crash the economy pay. Because that's what it's about. Because the ones who crash the economy are telling everyone else it's your fault. It's because you have Social Security, you have Medicare. It's because of everything else that we have a deficit into the future. It's baloney. I'm in polite company, or I would use another word. So, what is the Super Committee? This is a right-wing dream that came out of the debt ceiling negotiations. You'll remember a couple of months ago, the White House and the Congress was held up by a bunch of members of the Congress who said, Republicans mainly, but a number of people rolled over to it, who said, if you don't cut cut social spending, basic spending, we're not going to raise the ceiling on the U.S. debt. Now, the U.S. debt ceiling has been raised as a matter of course by 62 times, and nobody ever held it hostage like this. But they held it hostage, and the result was a decision to say, okay, we'll raise it, but in exchange for that, we want to have this super committee. The super committee has extraordinary powers to meet behind closed doors, 12 people, 12 members of Congress, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. By November 23rd, they have to come up with a report, and their report is designed, if they come up with agreement, to cut at least $1.2 trillion out of the federal budget over 10 years. As part of this deal, if nothing happens, then automatically, beginning of really in 2013, there will be cuts, but half will come out of defense and half will come out of non-defense spending, protecting the low-income persons' benefits, Social Security, most of Medicare and Medicaid, SNAP, food stamps, SSI, and the like. Whatever's going to happen out of the super committee isn't good. The problem is Washington has framed our politics in terms of deficits when we should be talking about jobs. We've moved off of a jobs scenario. So what caused the deficits? And let me just ask, this is a class, why do we have deficits?
Too much military spending.
Too much military spending.
Tax breaks to the
Wars.
wealthy.
Tax breaks to the wealthy, wasteful spending. You're right on target.
No corporate taxes.
No corporate taxes.
Effective corporate taxes.
Okay, he's not arguing against corporate taxes. So, if you look at this chart on this tape, what you'll see is the cause of the deficit they're talking about is primarily the Bush tax cuts that were implemented in 2001. That is why we have a deficit, plus 2 wars.
5 wars. Somalia. The other 3. I'm having a debate moment.
Wars that were not paid for by the American taxpayers, wars that sent our young, some of our middle age over, that sacrificed people but didn't provide enough to support them, and wars that have been wasteful. These are the main 2 causes of why we have a deficit. Then you add in the collapse of the economy brought about by deregulation of the banking system, and we have a mess today. It has nothing to do with Social Security or with Medicare or Medicaid or whatever. It's about a revenue shortage because the revenues have been given away to the very well off. It's not a spending problem. They want to tell you it's a spending problem. Of course, someday in the future we have to deal with the deficits that are being projected, but it's the least of our problems compared to jobs, compared to investing in building our bridges, compared to investing in our children, in good schools. We're not going to have a good country unless we do that. So that's what the super committee is, and by the 23rd they may come out with a report that can change taxes in America, give away more taxes to the well-off. They could come out with a report that cut your Social Security, your grandmother's Social Security, and the like. So, I guess I've asked you, and these are questions, why does economic and health security really matter? I think we know it. We need it. That's what a society and a civilization is about. Why does the occupation movement matter? I'm going to ask that really as a question. Yes, sir.
Because it's a bunch of people coming together, kind of want the same thing, or like get there.
A bunch of people coming together who want the same thing.
That have not been paid by corporate interests.
That's right.
That have not been paid by corporate interests. Anyone else? Why else? What makes the super? Any other thoughts on what makes the Occupy movement so important?
No, I wasn't raising my hand. I was shielding my eyes. But I guess in a sense, it's to articulate like a vision of society that flies in the face of the direction we've been going in for the last, I don't know, as long as I've been alive.
Okay, now I'm the megaphone. It articulates a vision of society that's been flying in the face of everything that's going on. I agree with all of those. We we've gone too far. Americans are scared, Americans want jobs, and Americans want some fairness in the way people have opportunity and inequities. We have seen in the last 20 years, you have this nice little chart here. From 1947 to 79, all boats went up together. The incomes of Americans roughly doubled, accounting for inflation. But from 1980 till to now, the incomes of the bottom 80% were basically flat, and the incomes of the top 1% grew by about 3 times. That's the problem. Tax cuts, changes in corporate policies that have created huge winners and lots of losers, giveaways of job opportunities overseas. We have a problem we have to come to terms with. And I guess I'll just say this as a general sense, values matter. Values are important. We forget about this. We hear all this talk in Washington about cutting dollars out of the federal budget. What we don't hear talk about, we hear crocodile tears about caring for future generations. And how do you think they're going to want to care for future generations?
Throw them overboard.
Throw them overboard or cut their basic protections. Cut their Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Cut their education. Don't fund their student loans. Don't fund their vocational education. Don't fund their job opportunities. You don't protect future generations of the 99% by throwing away the basic social and economic foundations of our nation or the decency of our nation. And that's what's begun to happen. So now we have an opportunity through this movement to rectify it. And the Occupy movement has given a call that I think is very important, because I think it's we don't know, I don't know what it is. That's why I asked you. I know that it sends a message out. Something is wrong and we need to change. Everything is out of balance. Inequality is out of balance. Many things, and it's now time for change. And this movement has sent a message, and a good message, that's getting Americans to think about it. Ironically, in some ways, it's tied into the Tea Party, I think. The Tea Party are people who are scared, not their leaders. They're manipulative and they're paid for by the Koch brothers and right-wing fanatics. But a lot of the Tea Party people, they're scared too. They see their kids not having jobs. They're worried about their jobs. There's an unrest, and this has crystallized that unrest, I think, in a very positive way. So with that, I'll just add one more thing. Now, just 2 things about generations. When they talk about future generations, they need to protect. Understand they're not talking about your future or our children's or our grandchildren's future. They're talking about the future generations of the very well off, because they'll pull the benefits out from you in the name of protecting you if you're young or middle-aged. The other final thing to say, and it's about values, Martin Luther King talked about a beloved community, a community where poverty, inequality, indecency is not accepted because it's wrong. It's not it goes against the human spirit. This group stands for that, and this group also stands, and here's the pizza, the best part of all. Much better than anything I'm going to say is, here comes the pizza. This community also stands for nonviolence. I know you're going to have some nonviolent training at 12 o'clock. It's extraordinarily important, because the forces that want to pull us apart would love us to be unruly in a way that they can blame us. And nonviolence is a form of love, it's a form of caring, it's a form of resistance, and being clear about what's right, what some of us would call godly, what some of us would call decent. So with that, thank you, but ask any questions you want. I also want to ask, there's a fellow here from Communication Workers of America. CWA is, well, they're going to have a bridge action. They're going to have, on the 17th, this week coming up, they're going to have a demonstration of the importance of building up the infrastructure. When he comes back, he can explain that. So let me ask questions, or you comment. And you don't even have to agree. That's the problem of being a professor. I actually like disagreements.
How do you answer the challenge that this is stirring up class warfare and maybe Marxist or anarchist?
Do you want to answer that?
You see that in the,
Yeah.
in the press.
How do you answer the charge that this is stirring up class warfare? This gentleman has a comment. You better talk loud.
If anything, class warfare began way before this happened. When you have people get into socioeconomic strata fighting for pretty much one pie, different slices of it, you're always going to have struggle.
Let me just, if anything, class warfare started well before this, when you have people struggling for a very small piece of the pie. Is that right? Yeah. I mean, I guess I ran into this joke looking up here. It's like, you're sitting at a table with 12 cookies. The 1% take 11 of them. And then they point to the one cookie that's left, and they tell the Tea Party, they tell the occupiers, they're trying to take your cookie away.
Yeah.
What is class warfare, really, this isn't about class warfare, this is about decency.
The problem is how they got the power to take, because everybody wants 11 cookies, and if you want 11 cookies, that's fine. But the problem is how they got the power to take the 11 cookies. You know what I mean?
That's a really, how did they get the power to take those cookies? Do you want to comment on that?
They bought Congress.
Because people,
They own the bakery.
because people allowed them to, and, through violence. That's all it is. Through violence and brainwashing.
Yeah, they
Through
bought the
violence,
bakery.
violence meaning,
Meaning police with guns, and you can't go in and storm in and do something about it. You can't go in and sit on a meeting in Congress and just hold that shit up and be like, look, we need to talk about this as people, right? Because that's all we would really have to do, honestly.
what we can do is tell our stories, and
I mean, we can't respect a process that doesn't give a fuck about us, right? I mean, that's what I think.
Congress is supposed to represent the people, their different views. What we can do is tell our stories and tell them together. Yes, sir.
I agree with the Occupy movement, and I'm not trying to be antagonistic, but me and my girlfriend both together we make $30,000 a year, and 7% of both our paychecks are going to Social Security to people sometimes a lot wealthier than us. So I mean, it's not completely balanced. It's not just
Here's a good comment. He and his girlfriend make $30,000 each, or between them, and they pay 7% for Social Security. And why should I have to do that? I'm going to answer that with a question.
Employers also pay 7%.
How many,
too.
are you thinking of having children one day?
she's pregnant.
She's pregnant, okay. Do you know that the moment your child is born, they will have life insurance through Social Security? If something happens to you or your wife, daughter, something happens to the father, married or not, or the mother, there's a benefit that's worth, on average, about, for your child would be worth almost $500,000 for the average worker. This program, in spite of all the brainwashing, this protects us. This is the basic life insurance we have for our children. The basic disability, if you are unable to work, it has that. The reason, it's also your only, ultimately, I know it's, when I was 20, I couldn't begin to think about retirement, and I don't think anyone ought to think about it who's 20. There are better things to think about. But it is going to be, if we keep it, the one piece of protection that you will have and your wife will have. So there's a lot of brainwashing. And yes, there's a lot that ought to be done with the tax system. But it's not, you are getting something. How many here have lost a parent when they were young? Okay? Most of us received Social Security. How many of us has lost a spouse? Well, I'll raise mine. My children, when she was disabled with cancer and then died, received protections. It protects everybody, but they want to pull it apart because what they want to tell you is you'd be better off with that in your pocket. It's baloney. Because what Social Security, if it was in your pocket, your benefits would be smaller. People who work long and hard at low wages get a proportionately larger benefit. People who work long and hard at higher wages, they get a larger benefit, but it's much less of a return. It's one system we have that rectifies the inequality in our life, and that's a piece of it. So that's my answer. Thank you. That's a good question.
How about Chile's Social Security system?
How about Chile's Social Security system? It's a disaster.
9%?
It's a
That's
disaster.
not
The
bad.
Chilean government is having to bail it out. They love to talk about it, just like Galveston. It's an absolute disaster. They pretend it's great, but it ends up with the government having to bail out a lot of people in it. It's great when the market's going up for a while, and it stinks when the market goes down. Yes, sir.
So it's my understanding that congressmen on both sides, or on both parties, have borrowed against Social Security. Is that...
Okay. Here comes the wonk in me coming out. It's his understanding that Congress has borrowed against Social Security. That not Congress. By law, Social Security can only be invested in U.S. Treasury notes. Those notes are the same notes that China holds, that Wall Street holds, essentially, or others. There's a $2.6 trillion trust fund. The last year, the federal government paid Social Security $115 billion this year for the money that's held. Absolutely, it is borrowed. In the same way if you put money in the bank. The one thing that holds it together is the same thing that holds together the value of this. It's the full faith and credit in the United States government. And ultimately, that's what we have to count on if we're going to maintain the dollar or Social Security or our institutions. But we have to get it working right for us.
What about the ceiling on contributing to Social Security?
Good question.
Are they talking about raising that?
Yeah, that's a
No.
terrific question. What about the ceiling on the tax, which ties into what both of you have just asked? On Social Security this year, you only pay that 6.2%, and the employer only pays that on earnings up to roughly $107,000. Above that, you don't pay anything, you don't get any credit. If you raise that cap, we project a modest long-term shortfall in Social Security. And I'll explain that in a second. If you raise that cap, eliminate it, you address the entire shortfall for your children, your grandchildren, and even your great-grandchildren.
And they're not talking
more
about
or less. Now, understand something. They wanted to, just like they talk about the deficit problem, and it's pushed jobs off, it's pushed education off the agenda, lots of things. They talk about Social Security causing the deficit. By law, Social Security cannot borrow. By law, it has to have the revenue coming in that it pays out. It's never borrowed a penny. It's actually loaning the government money, but they want to say it's part of the deficit problem, and it has nothing to do with it because they want to pull this away from the American people. Some do. Not everyone, but they want to talk about it that way. The shortfall we project, if Congress does nothing, and doing nothing is not a bad idea for this Congress in some ways.
Oh.
If Congress does nothing in Social Security, it'll be able to pay all benefits through 2035. And after 2035, it would be able to pay between 75 and 80% of benefits promised. It's not belly up. It has an ongoing dedicated stream of revenue, payroll contributions by working Americans. So it has money going through. The shortfall we have is the equivalent of what we would need if we lifted the cap, or it's the equivalent of what we would cost the United States Treasury if we let the Bush tax cuts for the top 2% continue. So it's really, do you want you and your children to have Social Security?
Yes.
Or do you want the very well-off to have these kinds of tax cuts? That's what's at stake. All of our problems should be like that. We have real problems in healthcare spending, public, private, and public. We spend twice as much as other nations. Fundamentally, we need Medicare for all. Medicare is the solution, it's not the problem. Or Social Security is a solution to the risk Americans face. We all face losses of income when we're working, if we die, for our families, if we become disabled, if we retire, if we have health problems. Social Security provides that solution. Medicare does for the old. Fundamentally, we need to provide it for everyone, and we need to get control of our health care costs. We spend 18% of everything we produce in this society on health care. A lot of that is profit to the insurance companies. A lot of that is profit to the pharmaceuticals. A lot of that is just poor planning. If our healthcare system operated the way the way Canada does, France does, Germany, whatever, all the industrial nations, our long-term shortfalls would not exist, basically. That is the problem we face. Healthcare costs that are rising, are out of control, and are not controlled. Good questions.
I think most people in the Tea Party are probably unaware that the Koch brothers are funding their movement, and they probably are unaware of who they are. They're just like, oh, yum, Coke, I like Coke. Similarly, like I've heard some speculation that there might be some kind of invisible puppet masters in the 99% movement. I was just wondering if you had heard anything about that, or...
Okay, I'll go to the Koch brothers and your point about people in the Tea Party. Let me just say, we've done national polling. The Strengthened Social Security campaign is a coalition of over 320 organizations, state and national. It includes major unions, major aging groups, major disability, major women's organizations. And these organizations are working together. It also includes human rights, NAACP, Latino organizations. This is going to let them do their... Out of respect for the voice check, I'm going to hold off here.